Welcome on board and happy International Women's Day. I think you would all agree with me that the COVID-19 pandemic impact spared no one at all on this planet. And this crisis is indeed unprecedented. However, crisis often comes with possible new opportunities. So today we are going to ponder together, can women's leadership be elaborated in the post-COVID-19 era with transformational leadership style? Transformational leadership aims to making changes, to transforming people, organizations, etc. And it is commonly agreed that there are 4 factors to it: idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individual consideration. And somehow, women leaders demonstrate in their works the characters of these 4 factors. Women don't work alone like a superstar or a hero. They bring teamwork. They practice authentic communication and promote cooperation and collaboration in the process. And this webinar is divided in 4 segments. In the first segment, we will take an overall view of women's leadership during the COVID-19 era in Asia. In the second segment, we will see how can women's transformational leadership overcome difficult situations in the context of 3 specific countries. Then in the third segment, we will focus on young women. What are effective ways to strengthen young women's leadership? And in the last segment, we will seek how can we develop common strategies for women's leadership advocacy and collaboration in church and society, especially in the post-COVID-19 era. And with this remark, I would like to invite Dr. Matthews to introduce our panelists.
It is my pleasant task to greet you and welcome you on behalf of the Christian Conference of Asia. This is the 9th in a series of webinars we are organizing since April 2020. And this is the 3rd one we are organizing with a special focus on concerns related to women. As you might have noticed, this webinar is being organized in conjunction with the International Women's Day 2021. As we all know, the fact that International Women's Day is a reminder for all of us to augment the voices of women and also to recognize the leadership of women at every level of society. So this is a special occasion for CCA and also its constituencies across Asia to be part of the observance of the International Women's Day 2021, and also to reiterate our commitments, as well as this is a special occasion and an opportunity for us to encourage all CCA member constituencies to put in place those practices and the systems that enable women to demonstrate their leadership. On behalf of the Christian Conference of Asia Secretariat, I take this opportunity to greet and welcome each and every one of you to this seminar. Although we are organizing this virtually, we do hope that this will be beneficial to many. Not only those who are participating at this webinar, this next 2 hours of time, and this will also be very widely publicized through CCA's YouTube and also through CCA's website and other social media platforms. We have with us several panelists, those who are coming from diverse backgrounds, including from the UN Women, and also representing different churches and related organizations from CCA's constituencies and beyond that. And I request my colleagues to introduce each and every one of them appropriately so that we will know that where they come from and which backgrounds and from which angle they will be focusing their presentations in the coming 2 hours of time. Thank you very much, friends.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you both, Sunila and Nancy, for the introduction. It's a big pleasure being part of such a distinguished panel today on this very important day of International Women's Day, and also to be speaking on the theme of women's transformational leadership during the pandemic and beyond. Because already before the pandemic, women in Asia have been facing significant barriers to participating in all levels of public life due to economic, social, and cultural constraints. And the barriers faced by women in taking on leadership roles today are not in any way new, but the pandemic is rather exacerbating pre-existing obstacles for women's public engagement. As with any other crisis, women are particularly hard hit and disproportionately affected by disasters like the COVID-19. The past year has put women in greater risk of ending up in poverty, carrying the burden of increased household duties, experiencing more online hate speech than before, while also being the main victims of gender-based and domestic violence. But despite this, during the pandemic, women have often been the first responders to the crisis, many times leading and helping their communities behind the scenes. Across Asia, we have seen that women were quick in adapting to the new context presented by COVID, by mobilizing support to people in need, forming online and offline networks to protect marginalized groups, and communicating evidence-based messages about the pandemic to those with limited access to the internet or limited access to information. As women are close to their community members, they often feel the vibrations of what is going on and what needs to be done. And this crisis keeps showing that women are thinking ahead, finding innovative and collaborative solutions to protect their communities from threats posed by the pandemic. Also seeing the pandemic as not only a health threat, but also a danger to peace and social cohesion, women have applied a holistic approach to take their communities through this crisis by establishing innovative partnerships with a diverse set of women from all sectors of the society, with different religious and ethnic affiliations. And with greater numbers of women at the forefront, these skills are coming to the fore. Because the society as a whole benefits when women are meaningfully included in all types of decision-making. While insufficiently documented and recognized, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that when women lead, strategies to strengthen community ties and build peaceful societies are often transparent and inclusive across economic, religious, political, and gender identities. The past year has unfortunately also shown the negative effects of not having women in leadership positions. In countries in Asia where women are excluded from decision-making on local and national level, COVID measures have insufficiently taken gender dimensions into account, such as through the closing of women's shelters, even though reported cases of domestic violence has increased dramatically during the pandemic, or by only allowing the head of the family to leave the home to buy daily necessities, which due to patriarchal norms have left women in further isolation, as the man is usually regarded as the family head. So the need to empower women's leadership has never really been more evident and important as it is now, especially promoting their transformational leadership style that builds capacity, resilience, and brings people together. So instead of seeking to get back to normal, we should try to build back better by recognizing women's leadership and promoting the empowerment of women in all sectors of the society.
We believe that the transformational leadership is what the world needs most when the times are unpredictable and uncertain. As we know, the 2020 season has surpassed with all previous years with one of the most dangerous and infectious pandemic outbreak that is called COVID-19. We have experienced its impact on political, social, religious, economical, and on individuals' lives tremendously on affecting our daily routine. Pakistan is the second largest South Asian country, and it doesn't matter whether it's the pandemic, natural calamities, or human-led disaster. The most targeted group is the women, girls, and children. And this is why Pakistan remains one of the lowest profits Pakistan has gained over the decades are now at risk of being rolled back. Being a woman of faith, I is to face the consequences of pandemic and speaking on the behalf of the women of faith, asking them to have a confidence in their ability to be the change makers, to be challenge takers, and to exercise their faith in rebuilding our communities and societies. So far, women are expected to lead in their communities as unknown and unrecognized leaders. However, women are making contribution in various forms. For example, being Sunday school teachers, they are conducting meetings and programs, teaching the word of God every Sunday to the children, despite they endure to give hope to every child beyond the hopelessness of the pandemic has caused to them. Women are working as the frontline health workers and social caretakers within their own towns and communities. They ensure helpful hygiene practices as one of the first measures of combating the pandemic, decreasing the risk of infections while increasing their own risk at being infected by their exposure to civilians they provide help. Women as educationalists carry out online lessons at home, tutoring their children to move on in view of bearing social responsibility for adhering the COVID-19 safety regulations. Women are social activists who have been openly wrestling with the government and various private organizations for not acting too fast and not offering financial support to those who are being alienated from the rest of the community. Women formed bereavement support groups and provided food supplements by mobilizing people. They are working 24/7 with the police department for the relief. In spite of all the barriers, hardships, and challenges they have been facing, they are still here to support the community and bearing the pandemic workload on their own shoulders. The bulk of unpaid care, holding together our fractured families, rebuilding shattered infrastructures, and reconciling our divided communities. In the end, I would like to say that no country is with perfect gender equality and human rights accomplishments. There's a lot more to do. In my understanding, gender equality and quality education for all are tools to make the success possible. Societies are built and stable by being inclusive and making fundamental freedoms, gender equality, and human basic rights at its very center to adapt to change and overcome the crisis of pandemic. And that's how they are able to shape the post-pandemic future for both men and women. Thank you so much.
COVID-19 has killed over 2 million people. My country, the Philippines, has the second highest number of infections in Southeast Asia. I know that many of us have loved ones who had died from the virus. I know that many of us did not even get the chance to bid our departed ones goodbye. There are people who say that all of us are in the same boat during this pandemic, but that is farthest from the truth. The rich got richer and the poorest even got worse. And the most vulnerable in our society remain that way: the children, the youth, and women. While our neighboring countries started their vaccination last December, we started last March 1. And at that pace we are going, at about 3,000 vaccinations a day, we will have the target 70 million vaccinated in over 20,000 days. That's about 55 years. But there is much deadlier virus that affects our world, and it has for years and years. There is a vaccine already, yet tens of thousands die from it every day. It does not affect the rich. The virus is hunger, and the vaccine is food. At the forefront of the fight against the virus called hunger in the Philippines is Nanay Miriam. Yes, she's like the Miriam in the Bible. As a leader of organized peasant farmer, she is at the forefront of the masses' struggle for genuine land reform, where almost every piece of land is being converted into industrial estates, shopping malls, parking lots, and golf courses. I have spent 3 years with this community of farmers, and every moment has been a gift. We all know that the best defense against COVID-19 or any disease is a healthy body. And the best way to a healthy body is the right food. But how do we do that when the primary producers of food, farmers and fisherfolk, are deprived of their livelihood? Thus, we celebrate Nanay Miriam and others like her who work for genuine peace based on justice. Another virus that has left more people dead in my country is the war on the poor. Again, the virus does not affect the rich. How does one stay at home when one's home has been bombed or burned down? How does one work at home when one does not have work? At the receiving end of the Duterte administration's anti-terror law are indigenous communities. They have been deprived of homes, livelihood, even education. Lest we forget, for indigenous peoples, education is not just a right, it's a self-defense. At the forefront of the struggle against the war on the poor is a young Lumad teenager named Kat Kat. Hundreds of Lumad schools have been closed by the government and labeled as training grounds for communist rebels. The backwit schools or evacuated schools that are now hosted in different churches, seminaries, and universities serves as the voice of the displaced, dispossessed, and disenfranchised Lumad school children. And Kat Kat is one of their most articulate and gifted spokespersons. Norma, on the other hand, is a deaconess of the United Methodist Church and has spent close to 40 years of her life serving the poor, marginalized, and oppressed communities. She is at the forefront of relief operations in the most vulnerable sectors, and her community was one of the first to reach out to those sectors when lockdowns began last March 16, 2020. She is also at the forefront against a deadlier virus, the war on drugs, which has left over 20,000 people dead. We all know that the drug problem is a medical situation. Incarceration does not help. The Duterte administration has a third way: shoot them dead. These three women, and there are more, have been leaders before COVID-19 hit. They still are, and they will always be. Thank you.
Violence against women in Australia is a serious issue, and it has been amplified by COVID-19. In Australia, pre-COVID-19, 1 woman a week is murdered by her current or former partner, and that is only the tip of the iceberg, with Australian police dealing with over 500,000 domestic violence matters a day. That has increased during COVID-19 with people facing increased abuse from their partners having been able to exert more control during lockdowns. And in Australia, violence against women is the leading contributor to all death, disability and ill health in women aged 15 to 44. It's not just an issue in the home, it's actually at the forefront of our national news currently, with a former young woman staffer in our national parliament recently going public with allegations of being raped by a senior staffer. A key concern has been how the matter was responded to, and that this involves the Minister for Defence, who is a woman. It's triggered several more allegations, with an inquiry now set up into the culture of our national parliament, led by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. The pandemic has aggravated already existing inequalities between men and women across society. In Australia, with more women working in industries vulnerable to the pandemic. And women being treated unequally to men in our society has been identified as a key driver for violence against women in our national frameworks. In other words, violence is driven by a culture that condones it. And in that national framework, Change the Story, faith communities have been identified as one of 11 key settings in our society for changing culture, changing the story in Australia. So it's timely that in light of both that and the pandemic, that we have the results of 2 studies about to be published this year in the Anglican Church in Australia. One is national, the other is local, Melbourne. I'm involved in both, but I want to really highlight and give credit to the work of 2 women in particular, the Reverend Tracy Lowson and Ms. Robin Busey. Their leadership has been critical for making these timely studies a reality. The national study is important because the first step in overcoming a difficult situation is to name it. And it was a motion of Tracy's that made our last General Synod in 2017 acknowledge the lack of both current and Australian research in this area. And I'm a member of the working group that was established as a result under Tracy's leadership. The National Christian Life Survey was commissioned to undertake a professionally designed independent study into the nature and prevalence of family violence in the Anglican Church, and the results of the study will be published shortly. And the other study I want to highlight is also the second study is important because it tells the story of what this looks like on the ground in terms of working to overcome violence and contribute towards gender inequality in Australia. It's an evaluation of the Preventing Violence Against Women program in Australia, conducted by the University of Melbourne. I have the privilege of chairing the committee of that program, but I want again to highlight that Robin Busey's work has been shown great leadership in this space, working collaboratively at all levels in the diocese with clergy and laity, women and men, encouraging ownership, developing teams, which has increased their reach and impact of the work. And really that has made the study a reality. And again, the results will be published shortly. And I'll come back to that in my next presentation.
Transformational leadership of women in a post-COVID-19 world, especially from the context of Indonesia. In Indonesia, many forms of violence increased during the COVID-19 era. Domestic violence, child marriage, rape, incest, forced marriage, marriage by abduction get worse in times of pandemic. Work from home, study from home, and worship from home, on one side useful to prevent family member from the coronavirus, but on the other side, it causes stress, tension, and conflict in the family. COVID-19 causes many problems. Many people lose their jobs and experience financial difficulties. In line with that crisis, gender-based violence get higher than ever, and most of the victims are women and girls. According to the National Commission on Violence Against Women, in 2020, violence against women in marriage has increased by 4%. The number of domestic violence cases was 6,480. The important question is what women leaders are doing to tackle the problem of violence. How women leaders have demonstrated their transformational leadership to overcome difficult situations and build resilient communities. To To answer that question, I would like to share about Christian women leaders in Indonesia and their struggle in ending violence against women and girls. They are member of ATEWI, or Association of Theologically Educated Women in Indonesia. Most of them are working as pastors, lecturers, researchers, and activists. Actually, all of them are working hard, doing advocacy on the issues related to gender and human rights. They're campaigning to stop violence through many activities, workshops, webinars, training, long march on the streets, and other actions. They are also using social media like Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and other media to get support from many parties. They expand their engagement with the government, NGOs, universities, women movements, and associations working around women's rights and gender equality. Despite of many challenges in patriarchal society, they are not discouraged. They build networks and collaborate with various organizations and institutions to respond to the crime against women. They also work hard to fulfill the rights of the victims. In recent years, they're struggling for this country to have a law on the elimination of sexual violence as a legal tool to protect Indonesian women and other vulnerable groups. In the church, they have Women Crisis Center as an integrated service center for the victims. For example, the Christian Church of Pasundan with WCC Pasundan Durebang in West Java, the Christian Church of Sumba with WCC Pandulang Angu, the Protestant Evangelical Church in Timor with Rumah Harapan, the Batak Karo Protestant Church with WCC Sopo Damai in Sumatra, and others. Through many ways and in many places, women leaders in Indonesia are joined hands to continue demonstrating their transformational leadership to bring freedom, justice, and peace in their society.
Like other countries in Korea, we experienced a surge in gender-based violence caused by COVID-19. There have not been many safe spaces for women. Gender-based violence and child abuse have increased, and many women treated as cheap labor and secondary beings have lost their jobs. Women's unemployment rate and depression increased significantly. The situation was the same in the COVID-19. Church members didn't attend the church service physically, and it caused financial problems for the church. And the women ministers, who were considered the least important ones, were fired. Women were relegated to secondary roles again and took more parts of housework. In the face of this reality, Korean female leaders were the first to start thinking creatively with an inclusive attitude. We started creative activities in a new space, virtual spaces, where place and time are not restricted much. Women continued to create small gatherings of women's solidarity and underprivileged people, and established a new network in the era of disconnection, COVID-19. For example, in Untuda, on women's organization where I also belong, we ran a virtual feminist worship service. The Korean women who live in Korea and also Korean women from various countries participated in the service together. Out of the offline, new solidarity has been formed. In Untuda, we wanted to build a place where women could stand in as many and effective ways as possible at a time when women continue to lose their positions in society. Therefore, we sought ways for women from the church to earn income outside the church and started a women's business. We are currently preparing to operate small but diverse experience guaranteed gatherings where people want to come and hold lectures and take the lectures from this year, April. Our transformational women's leadership continues to question the existing hierarchical and authoritarian leadership and decision-making method. We pursue a more equal and communicative decision-making approach. So our decision-making process is a little slow, but everyone's opinions are valued and everyone can be respected. I think the leadership required in the COVID-19 era is this kind of leadership. It is a leadership that connects each other in a period of disconnection, and leadership that embraces more people in a period of exclusion. And based on all this, there is warm love for the world God created and for all created beings. Through that love, concerns for the other and other weak people gives us the power to see the world more inclusively, and the wisdom to solve inequality and break the barriers to marginalized people. We are creatures created in the image of creative God. When we exercise our original creativity so that no one else is left, we will be able to carry out transformational leadership. Thank you.
It's about, in my personal experience, how effective ways of strengthening women leadership is. I think in my experience, considering the backgrounds and the circumstances of largely patriarchal culture and context of Pakistan, shaping how we socially interact, I believe the following ways offer helpful strategies for our post-COVID-19 Asian world. If we talk about the churches, church leaders should learn to share the minimum resources with others. It requires current women to empower women and promote justice for women's rights without being threatened. Together towards next step must be the mission of the church. It should be inclusive in nature, and church needs to provide platforms and organized discussion units for women from the congregation come up with practical ideas and implementation procedures. Churches must move forward by prioritizing meetings ahead of bureaucracy and paperwork for gaining meaningful practical results. In so doing, we can obey God's command to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Church must initiate general discussions among girls and women on women-related issues and to advocate them for how they can promote their equal rights, justice, and empowerment in their communities as part of their responsibility. It is high time that the church include women in all the phases of church life, from planning to implementation and evaluation stages. And as far as the community builders is being concerned, empowered women empower women as a strategy that leads common women to train and uplift other women as leaders and empower them to stand for themselves. For example, if one woman takes the responsibility to educate, to train, and to provide platform to at least one girl and one woman, the change will be certain. Taking steps by 100 women at a time will equip 200 and then 400, and then the number will increase so on. Most of the funding organizations prefer working with their partner organizations only. I believe if every organization should have some percentage set aside for people struggling to bring change in their own communities and towns at grassroots level, it can be helpful for the people to come up with the ideas and to be more effective. The women workforce or human resource will increase when women will have equal opportunities in all sectors of our society, either it's government, private, semi-government, or semi-private settings, to work more effectively and efficiently. Organizations should employ women for women, working from top to bottom for their ultimate safety, security, and confidence while working in different fields. Before major decisions are made on high level of organizations, the views of women should first be considered and included within decision making before its implementation in regular practices of the organizations. Funding for the women-focused organizations is very limited around the globe. By increasing the funding and investing into women-focused organizations on a long-term basis will be profitable when we will be sustaining healthy working body and sustaining both genders. We also need to develop and promote gender-sensitive curriculum and teacher training courses on civic education for men and women, that how we can promote women's equality, women empowerment, and women rights injustice, with helping both genders to identify their roles in this venture. In conclusion, I'll say be the woman who heals the wounds of other women without letting the world know how deep the wounds are. I want to add in that promoting transformational leadership of women will enhance the performance beyond expectations and will develop stronger social bonds within our structures. Thank you so much.
An individual's leadership is not created in a single day, but is achieved by experiencing various success and also failure experiences as leadership, and by different leadership experiences. But we, especially young women in Asia, first have less experience in excellent and diverse leadership. In particular, male-centered leadership experiences give us uniform and violent leadership experiences, such as charismatic leadership. Second, we have not much chance of success or failure experience. Some men provide young women an opportunity, and if the young women don't play the role well, they restrict women's experience by saying it's because of they are women. But in fact, no one is good at it from the beginning. Everyone grows up through the process of reflection on the experience of success, failure, and regret. So we need to open as many various places as possible for women to stand as leaders. Through diverse, repetitive, and many experiences as leaders of all sizes, we can strengthen young women's leadership and greet many young women's leaders in Asia. We also need to educate young women who have no excellent leadership experience about practical ways of transformational leadership. Nowadays, there is a variety of facilitator education in Korea for the people using virtual meetings, often under COVID-19. We can also do that. We should also provide education that can be used for the functional leadership roles for Asian young women. I've served as a member of the Youth Commission in the World Council of Churches, and also as a youth advisor of Central Committee of World Council of Churches for 7 years now. I was 23 years old when I first started to serve it. At that time, I didn't know what role I should play or what to say at the meetings. It was 3 to 4 years from that time that I began to talk and suggest my opinions. I was very fortunate enough to get the chance to train for the leadership several times. And in that journey, I was able to meet a lot of good women leaderships and learn transformational leadership from them. So I want to suggest that we be more generous, patient, and happy in anticipation of growth of Asian young women leaderships, especially young women, by providing as many trials as possible and useful leadership learning for the expansion of Asia's transformative women's leadership. Thank you.
If you have had the chance to visit the Philippines, you will soon discover 3 things. First, all the towns and barrios are named after women. Second, practically all the mountains and volcanoes are named after women, women's experiences, or women's body parts. And third, Filipino languages are inclusive. Historians and social scientists tell us that the pre-Christian natives were led by women priests called babaylan or katalonan. Aside from being the priest, they also serve as midwives, mediums to the spiritual world, seers, and healers. They were the first people the Spanish colonizers domesticated, demonized, or destroyed. Those who study the 500 years of Filipino resistance to colonialism and now neo-colonialism will discover that there are so many women, named and unnamed, who did not conform to what church and society expected them to do. Princess Urduja and Gabriela Silang fought the invaders. Gregorio de Jesus was vice president of the Katipunan Revolutionary Movement that overthrew the Spaniards. She was 21. Salud Algabre was a leader of the Sakdal uprising against the US occupation. Judy Tagiwalo helped found Makibaka when she was 20. Kwok Poilan loves to remind us that Asian women make up 1/4 of the world's population. In other words, we, all the Asian women in this forum, represent 25% of the world's peoples. We need to own this fact. We need to remind the rest of the world of this fact. And I think one of the best ways to do this is to share our stories. Let us not forget, Paul was a theologian. Jesus was a storyteller. It is the storyteller who is the better teacher. Thank you.
The leadership nurturing doesn't happen overnight, and it really takes time. So if we are look forward into a future matured women leadership, we need to provide our younger generation with opportunities and for them to establish the experiences, even the opportunity to make mistakes and learn from making mistakes. I think that's very important for the younger generation to go through. Now, with this, we will conclude our third segment of this webinar, and then we will now move towards the final segment. And in this final segment, we will seek how can we develop common strategies for women's leadership advocacy and collaboration in church and society, especially in this post-COVID-19 era. So we will also have 3 panelists. Let's begin with Fanny first. Fanny?
Thank you so much, Nancy. As we have heard from the previous panelists, there are many examples of how the work done by women in Asia during the pandemic has proven to be effective and successful in both promoting, protecting, and improving their societies. And I would like to give you just a few examples showcasing women's innovative leadership that we can learn from in building back better after the pandemic, both in terms of promoting gender equality and social cohesion, but also in finding new ways of doing things. For example, in some Asian countries, the reported cases of domestic violence increased by more than 100% when lockdowns were in place. So in responding to this so-called shadow pandemic, women's organizations scaled up their operations of emergency assistance, such as by creating WhatsApp groups and using other types of digital platforms where women could reach out in case they needed help. Grassroots women also developed community-based approaches to disseminate COVID-related messages among hard-to-reach populations, such as women in rural areas, to raise awareness about hand hygiene and social distancing measures through mobile phones and other mobile apps. And then in reacting to false information where certain groups, often religious or ethnical minorities, were blamed for spreading the virus, religious women's group came together to counter this type of disinformation, saying that, well, this is not true, as a mean to maintain and to strengthen the social ties within their communities. So from these examples, we see that when women lead, it is with flexibility, with inclusivity, and with innovation. And this is exactly what we need to focus on beyond the pandemic, a collaborative leadership style that is mindful of diverse needs. So what do we need to do then to ensure that women can continue pursuing this type of leadership, and especially being recognized and valued for their contributions at local, national, and regional level? Well, first of all, we need to promote and expand on existing women's networks that are already in place. They have the knowledge of what their communities need, but they need to be acknowledged and provided with resources, particularly financial resources, as women's organizations are usually underfunded. Then secondly, we need to create an enabling environment for the next generation of women leaders, as been stated by many previous panelists as well, because young people are our future and perhaps best equipped to counter patriarchal norms and to find new ways of doing things. But that can only happen if we listen to their voices and give their ideas as much recognition as we would do with the older generation. Then thirdly, it is important that we work through a multi-sector approach where women and girls, men and boys with various socioeconomic backgrounds, ages, religions, ethnicities, and abilities are involved in decision-making at all levels of the society. The pandemic has shown that women often apply a holistic and all-encompassing approach to contribute to positive change, rather than just working in silos. For example, despite different religious belongingness, women from various religious groups in Asia has managed to find common denominators to jointly work for peace and social cohesion during the pandemic. As the pandemic risked tearing us apart and dividing societies, identifying what brings us together is one of the most important lessons that we can learn from inter-religious collaboration, which is often led by women. So in developing common strategies that nurture women's leadership to make the post-COVID world a little bit better than before, I think we need to start with our own context. And I do in my role, what can I do in my profession, and what can I do in my community to empower women and to improve my society? So I think I will leave you with that question, as only you have the answers to that. But I do think that our most fundamental beliefs and values, whether that is based on religion or something else, will help us find a way. Thank you.
I do want to speak further, particularly about preventing violence against women first, as that really is about that women and men coming together to achieve equal access to opportunities and people living without violence in whatever form. In other words, it's a very real opportunity for the church to model what it means to believe women and men are made in the image of God. And how we've actually really want to move forward in this program under Robin's leadership is that we are widely recognised as a practice leader for prevention work in faith settings, and much of this work continues to be pioneering. But what's important in terms of the points that have already been made is that we have a good reputation, and we are sharing our learnings and working with the wider Anglican Communion, other denominations in Australia, faith groups, the family violence sector, academics, and with the government. And my hope is that the work will be supported by the national principles that are being developed by the National Family Violence Working Group. That's the group I'm on that commissioned the study. And we've also developed national principles, which our hope is the diocese in Australia, the Anglican diocese in Australia will adopt. And that really encourages things like the training of clergy and lay leaders, and also just the encouraging a culture in our church that promotes and encourages equality. And also that it will be supported by the studies that I spoke about earlier that have been undertaken. I want to highlight some key achievements, which I think really outline some of the, or help us when we think about strategy in terms of advocacy and collaboration. These are further strategies really to the two I've already named, which are developing principles and contributing to the evidence base. So when I think about this local program, it really does have some strategy, I think, that's worth highlighting that touch on advocacy and collaboration. One has been in the area of training of clergy and lay leaders. People who've undergone the training are saying how they can respond more helpfully and safely to disclosures. And also, what's most important, I think, they know they're not the experts, that they need to refer to expert help. And also that they're even more importantly, they're asking questions about the roles women are fulfilling in their church, and is that equitable? Is that really involving them in the leadership they're capable of? And the program is also supporting our 2 theological colleges to integrate this into their core training. The program is encouraging advocacy at a local level. We've encouraged the appointment of family safety champions in local parishes, and we recommend they're women as that is more safe for other women to disclose often or feel more comfortable, but also too, it's about encouraging equality of leadership in our parishes. We've also been able to secure government funding for a whole of church pilot project, working with parishes, with 5 parishes with a whole of church approach, which captures and expands on what I've already talked about. Also, as a diocese, we've been working on developing family violence policy procedures and guidelines to support the work. More broadly, and foundationally, the Preventing of Violence Against Women program has been a partnership between the church and our agencies, both in terms of funding, but also in sharing of expertise and opportunities. Our welfare agencies are part of the story in terms of early intervention programs and response. We've been key in encouraging prevention work, and our schools are another key setting and have led the way with government on a whole of organisation approach. And this really leads me to my final example of collaboration and a key strategy, I think, social enterprise. Our church partnering with our agencies to provide opportunities for education and pathways to employment. One is a very simple thing. It's a homework club. And it's offering tutoring to school-age migrant and refugee children. And in the pandemic, the 2 women responsible for the program have ensured it continued without any interruption, transferring face-to-face tuition to Zoom. And in fact, my hope is their ingenuity will actually open up opportunities to offer this service to all children who are in care, in the care of Anglicare, foster children, and in out-of-home care. And 2 of our parishes have had a great impact in the area of hospitality. One well placed to help our state parliament with food prepared in parliament kitchens during the pandemic to help with the distribution. And a lot similarly with another parish offering opportunities for training in hospitality and to international students and temporary visa holders, for example, so they can get a job. It's been one of the ironies in Australia that as the hospitality industry is reopening, there's actually a shortage of workers. And the great news is people are starting to get jobs through these training programs. And those programs, by the way, are both run by women. Those examples I've just given may not be so much about leadership, but they are both about boys and girls, women and men, having opportunities in both education and employment. And those 2 areas are key for women and men contributing positively to our society in the post-COVID-19 era. Thank you.
Nurturing women's leadership for transformation of society requires joint and collaborative actions. I would like to share 2 specific examples at local levels in Indonesia that showing leadership of women that contributed to the elimination of violence and promote peaceful communities. The first example is related to the experience of a group women leaders in Sulawesi, central part of Indonesia, whose name themselves as Gerakan Perempuan Sulut or Sulut Women's Movement. Recently, this local group as an interfaith, interethnic, interinstitution civil society movement has succeeded in advocating a case of domestic violence in that area. The victim is a wife who has been violated for a long time by her husband, a man who has a good position in that region. He is a leader of a political party. Because of that case, the perpetrator is finally demoted from his position as a vice chairman of the House of Representatives. The strategies used by this group include emphasizing teamwork and effective communication. They build networks and collaborate with various institutions, organizations, and communities at local and national level to respond to that case. They was never stopped to speak out. They used empathy to engage followers. Women and men from many places in Indonesia just gave them support and signed a petition. The second example is related to the experience of Christian women leaders in Sumba and their struggle to stop sexual violence in Sumba. As reported on the various social media, a form of sexual violence that is rife on Sumba Island is marriage by abduction, or in Bahasa kawin tangkap. This practice occurs repeatedly. Sumba Island, as you may see, my background, the picture of my background, that's my hometown. This practice occurs repeatedly. The most recent case occurred on 4 March 2021, 4 days ago. This practice is considered as a forced marriage, a culture-based violence that has a real adverse effect on women victims. Women leaders in Sumba are doing advocacy to kawin tangkap. Same with the group of women leaders in Sulawesi. Their strategy is build networks and collaborate with various institutions, organizations, and communities at local and national levels. They started from grassroots people. They mobilized local, regional, and national forces to speak out rejecting this practice. They made a petition to the Indonesian government, the police, and the church to stop these crimes against women. They asked for support from many parties, including from the international community. Their purpose is clear. Sexual violence against women must end. Though the journey is still far to go, but they never give up. Because of their actions, there was a memorandum of understanding between them and the local government, the police, the customary leaders, and the church leaders to prevent and eliminate violence against women. Several cases of that violence are currently being handled by the law. So from the two examples, there was common strategies for women leadership. Networking, collaboration, and coordination are some of them. In Indonesia, there is a wise sentence which stated that united we stand, divided we fall. Or in Bahasa, bersatu kita teguh, bercerai kita runtuh. This saying relates to the strategies of women leaders in Sulawesi, Sumba, and other places in Indonesia. They are doing advocacy as a teamwork. They have shown that one typical of women leadership is collective leadership, sharing power, using power to empowering others. Thank you.
I think that we need, first of all, to look at women's political participation as covering all levels of the society, because women's political engagement is important everywhere, including in the parliament. However, women need to fight much harder than men to be part of formal decision making. But women can also use their networks and their platforms to promote each other, as we've been discussing a lot with the collaborative force that women have, and to raise awareness about the specific issues and concerns that are faced by women. Also to enable normative change on what women's role in the society is supposed to look like, showing that women are not assigned to the private sphere, but needs to be visible and heard in the public sphere as well. I think in many countries where we have female chief executives or a large representation of women in parliament, it has many times been possible thanks to society-wide values and priorities that promote gender equality. So women's meaningful participation in the political life requires normative progress on what women's role in the society is and what it means. And that starts with women taking the stage, using their platforms to raise their voices and sharing their opinions and ideas, because women's movement is strong and it leads to change. I think that women can change norms. Women are already doing that. We see that in many different parts of Asia, but the progress is unfortunately quite slow. But we're still seeing that women are increasingly being politically active also in the formal sphere. So I think that we need to continue taking on this battle to develop an enabling environment where it's just no longer possible not listening to women.
I think when we think about models for encouraging women in church leadership in our churches and for the future, I think one of the main things is it is about being a good model oneself as a leader. And part of that to me is being an authentic, faithful leader myself. As was mentioned just then by Fatty in terms of the political sphere, I myself am thinking a lot about how am I taking the opportunities to speak up and to be a voice. And so it's important as women, those of us who are in leadership now, to be using our voice, but also too, to be actively looking at how we are encouraging younger women. And so I think one of the main strategies is encouraging women using their gifts at the local level and highlighting that and speaking up about it. One of the things I've really am realizing more and more is when it's about encouraging women into leadership, encouraging women to use their gifts, sometimes you have to ask women more than once. And that's that classic thing I don't know about elsewhere, but in Australia, there are studies a lot around the whole thing that men will often say yes to something, even if they think they can only do 70% of it. But women will be worried about whether they can do the whole job and say no. And so more and more, me and other women are articulating, you must ask more than once. Don't just let it be once. And particularly if you're asking women to consider vocation or going to theological college or something like that. And I think it is really important too that we're supporting women, providing mentoring for women, and also support in other ways, and being led by what they see as the support that they need. One of the things I'm also it's interesting, in the Diocese of Melbourne just recently, we actually moved towards having for our leadership of our archbishop, as well as having ordained leaders, we have our lay leadership in our archbishop in council, and we have actually moved to having a split. Multiple election processes to ensure election for women clergy and lay, election for men clergy and lay, so that we're actually ensuring, even in the way we're conducting elections, that that there are actually equal men and women in our leadership bodies. That's just one example. We've also made it a thing in other of our church councils, subcommittees, that we are to be aiming at and achieving 50% of male and female. So what I'm actually touching on there is the issue of quotas. And I began this presentation talking about our political, what's happening politically in Australia. It is interesting in Australia that the Labor Party has had a quota system for many years, a national rule, and now it's reaping the benefit of actually more and more having equal numbers of men and women in Parliament. The Liberal Party, who hasn't gone down that route, is really struggling with the whole issue of women in Parliament. And I mention that because I am wondering, as a woman leader in the church, whether more and more we need to be encouraging quotas as much as we can. And I'm thinking about what does that mean for, say, women in leading parishes and so on. I'm not sitting here with all the answers. I'm saying I think there's something for us to learn in that. And I think also too, thinking about policy can also be, our policies can be really important here. We've worked on having policies around diversity and inclusion in our church, and also developing family violence policies, procedures and guidelines, because I think those things can really help ensure ongoing work in this area, and how our organisation is being shaped. And some of it is as simply as I said, in relation to the training, encouraging people to be asking the question, does our leadership reflect our community? And if the answer is no, well, what's going on? So I hope that sort of helps a little bit in answering that question.
We are thinking about theological reflection. So according to me, God gives wisdom. God gives strength and capability for women to be a transformational leader in the church and the society. Not only for the men, God not only give give wisdom and strength, capacity for men, but also for women to be a transformational leader in the church and in the society. So for me, women are co-partner, co-workers of God to bring peace, freedom, and justice in this world, in the church, in the society, to bring transformation in the society. So that's my reflection, my theological reflection, that not only men could be a leader, but also women could be a leader. And God gave them wisdom. God asked them to be co-partner, co-workers, to bring transformation in the society.
Because I'm serving in the rural areas, that is the place where most of the people do not have access to internet. So I believe that the first thing to bring the woman in leadership in such areas where there is no access to the internet or the social media is that you should have your availability to the women in such places. When you go to them and you have a one-to-one interaction with them, the first thing that you need to build a relationship with them. After building that relationship, they will be more comfortable to speak to you about their concerns and issues. And that is one of the point where you can help them to not just to tell them that you are the different in the world, but by listening to them, that what are their major concerns, you can reflect through your experience and through the word of God, that how it is encouraging for the women to work as a God gift to the world. Secondly, as I mentioned in my speech in one of the sessions, that by taking the responsibility of some of the groups, I have taken a responsibility of some of the girls to educate them. And it's not that they come to the school, they go to the school and I'm just asking them how they are doing in the school and getting education. But I also interact with their families. I talk to their mothers. I talk to them then why and how together we can work to empower their girls into the society, and how we can be helpful, what strategies we can adopt to bring their situation in front of the people so that more people will be engaged to help them, not only financially, but emotionally, to providing them a comfortable zone where they can be more easy to speak their heart. Because in our culture, most of the women do not speak because they think that if they will speak, it will be a shame for the family. They think that if they will speak, they will be criticized by their own families, by the male in the families, by the relatives. So they most of the times keep their mouths shut and they don't speak up their emotional hurts or their anything that they go through with. So it's very important that we should give them a very comfortable relationship where they can trust you easily, that they can speak, and their concerns will be, will not be open to everybody. And the last thing I believe is that it's not just to take the responsibility and say that I have done that. You should continuously following up that thing. Until unless you don't follow what you are doing or what the responsibility you have taken, you may not know to what level that thing has moved on. So it's not just that I'm looking after the group of women, I'm talking to them, but I'm continuously in a relationship and follow up of the things, of the issues that they are going through with, and I'm counseling them that how they can improve their family situation, regardless they are not educated, regardless that what the status background they have. But the most important thing to let them know is that they are loved, no matter they are poor or not, no matter they look good or ugly, no matter they are educated or not. We are humans and we have the same emotions and feelings. The difference is only that we have been raised into different background families. So when we will help one another in such a way that they feel together with us, they feel equal with us, only then they can express themselves, and we can build a good community of women who are using their skills and their qualities that has been suppressed by the violence or some of the other issues in the families will be explored slowly, if not in themselves, maybe into the lives of their children. Thank you.